This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 9th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits, to cast them out, and to cure every disease and every sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, also known as Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Cananean, and Judas Iscariot, the one who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. As you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without payment, give without payment. The Gospel of the Lord. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the service, it is simply the luck of the lectionary that our gospel reading on this Sunday, in which we send off missionaries to Honduras, is a story about Jesus sending out some of his first disciples on one of their first missionary trips. And indeed, there are some striking similarities between our missionaries and Jesus' first missionaries. First of all, our missionaries will be doing things like building a house, serving on medical brigades, and digging latrines. Yet, while all of these folks are very talented and educated people, none of them are professional builders or latrine diggers. And as far as I know, there's only one doctor going down. Maybe there are some more from the other group. The first missionaries that Jesus sent out were called to do these things: cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Yet, when you look at the list of these folks just before those instructions, you might have noticed that as far as we can tell, none of these guys are doctors or exorcists. And only Jesus has ever raised the dead, and only once. Indeed, most of these guys are fishermen, with the exception of Matthew and Simon the Cananean. Matthew is a tax collector, so he professionally cooperates with the Romans in collecting their taxes. The title Cananean is synonymous with zealot, so named because these folks were zealous for the liberation of Israel, and so they hid out in the hills around Canaan and ambushed Roman columns. So they were an interesting pair, to say the least, amongst Jesus' disciples, but neither of them were professionals at the task to which Jesus sent them. Next, our missionaries are going to a very specific place, a town in Honduras that they go to every year. Of course, there are lots of places that need help in Honduras, and there are lots of places between here and there that also need help. But to be really effective and to focus on the real needs of the people, the organizers at Haven Universe realized a while ago that they needed to pick a place and be there for the long haul. The goal is to make a difference in that community instead of just going someplace for a week and then leaving. Often, when mission and teams just go to someplace for a week or so and never go back, they feel really good about what they did, but they may not have even begun to address the needs of the folks in that community. Jesus also sends his missionaries out with initial instructions that honestly seem kind of harsh. Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That also seems odd. After all, at the end of Matthew's gospel, Jesus specifically sends the disciples to Samaria and to all the ends of the earth. They are to go everywhere. And somehow, though, at this moment, they need to go to a specific place and to a very specific group of people. Right now, he says you need to focus on the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that doesn't mean that others don't matter, but often, when we shoot for everything, we hit nothing. And sometimes folks become so overwhelmed with the needs everywhere that they don't do anything anywhere. Jesus focuses the disciples on one group for this moment. And finally, our missionaries, they're not getting paid. Indeed, it costs a boatload of money to do this trip, not only because of the travel involved, but because they're bringing with them a lot of the supplies and the medicines that they'll need. Folks here at Prince of Peace have collectively contributed about $8,000 to help for this, which is great, but none of that goes to paying salaries for missionaries. Jesus also sends his missionaries out with the expectation that they will not get paid either. He tells them, "You received without payment, give without payment." This also is kind of strange. After all, this trip is also not going to be without cost. In other places, Jesus tells his missionaries to stay in whatever home welcomes them and to eat whatever is set before them. And later, Paul makes the point that the laborer deserves to be paid. And so, like our missionaries who couldn't afford to do this forever for free, the disciples can't either. But in this moment, Jesus wants to make a point. And that point is that as the good news is announced, there cannot be even the slightest hint that the disciples are looking for what's in it for them. They are sent to the lost sheep in order to heal the sheep, not to fleece the sheep, and they need to show that by announcing good news, not by suggesting that there should be anything in it for them. And these missionary instructions from Jesus are good for all of us to remember, not only when we commission international missionaries, but as we live our lives as Christians each day. Because after all, the overarching instruction is, as you go, proclaim the good news. And that instruction is for all of us, all the time. That is, for all of us. Whether you've reached where you think you're headed or not, your job is, as you go, to proclaim the good news that God is near. And often to do that, it's necessary for us to remember that we don't have to be professionals to share God's love with others. Sometimes what's needed most is that we care and focus on the needs of others instead of ourselves. Those first disciples, they really didn't know much about curing the sick or casting out demons. And frankly, we don't know how technically effective they were. But they clearly made an impact because they cared and because they accepted Jesus' call to help people with things that Jesus knew those folks actually needed. Sometimes lots of well-meaning people aren't so effective at helping out because they think, hey, you know what? This is what I'd really like to do to help people out. This is what we did in my church when I was a kid and it was so much fun and I want to do that. But sometimes that's not what folks actually need in the place where you are. Sometimes they need you to dig them a latrine, as unglamorous as that sounds. And for us too, to proclaim the good news as we're on the way, it means that we too need to accept a call to help a particular person or a particular group of people or in a particular place, even if there are 40 emails in your inbox telling you about all these other crises that somehow everybody wants you to pay attention to. In today's gospel reading, Jesus talks about announcing the good news. But what we're so often surrounded with is bad news, terrible news, devastating news, crisis news, and it can become numbing. People get overwhelmed and it saps the energy out of them to do good anywhere. Jesus' call is to fight against that and to be willing, as we go along, to do good in particular places and with particular people who need help, even and especially when those people and places are not being lifted up all over the place. I mean, sometimes those are the people Jesus most needs us to help. And for us too, proclaiming the good news while we're on the way means for us to act in a way that shows that we are in it for Jesus and for others and not for ourselves. I mean, one of the other big projects this week is getting ready to outfit the apartment that Joan was telling us about for our recently arrived refugee family. We're doing this with Lutheran Social Services, and our social justice ministry team met this week with the LSS staff by Zoom, and they went over a lot of details and told us what we should expect and what was expected of us. And one of the things, though, they said was, as you place all of these things in the apartment, you get all these things ready, please do not leave religious symbols or literature in the apartment. Because after all, we don't know what religion, if any, this family practices. But it's also important, especially if the family we have adopted is not Christian, for us to show them that we're willing to help them because of our faith in Jesus, not because we think somehow we're going to convert them. Indeed, one of the things that is most important is showing Jesus who we believe Jesus is by the way we act, instead of suggesting that we're somehow in this to bump up our membership. As you go, proclaim the good news. That's the message of Jesus, not only for missionaries, but for all of us. And that's because all of us in our baptisms are sent into the world to be agents of Jesus' love. And often the best way to proclaim the good news is to focus on what we can do to help people with the needs they actually have at the moment. Often the best way to proclaim the good news is to do something now in a particular place with a particular person or a particular group instead of waiting for a more glamorous opportunity. And very often, the best way to proclaim the good news is simply to express our hope and confidence in Jesus by the way we live and act, so that Jesus can be seen in us and through us.